It's about understanding startups, that not all startups are technology startups, right? And then furthermore, I've just been humbled by the sheer fact that come from the Silicon Valley, I have this very, product is the way, that's the only way I've ever thought. But in reality, there's downsides to that level.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen. I'm a product manager at a late stage startup in Southeast Asia. I'm on a quest to find out how great products are being built in Southeast Asia. Today, I have with me Derek, who is a core PM at One Championship. Can you tell us how you got into product management in the first place?
So for myself, I started my career in product marketing over the last decade. It's crazy, that's been over 10 years now that I've been working.
You look very young.
Oh, the beauty is a little bit of wisdom, I suppose, but I've been able to learn more and through a lot of hypothesis testing early on in my career, which made me realize as a product marketer, I was very well equipped to serve certain problems, but I could certainly benefit from learning how do you build products from 0 to 1. So I had an opportunity to stay here in Singapore after working at my startup and join One Championship as a senior product manager, where I focus on the One esports business, which combines my passion and love for the video gaming and esports industries with core competencies as a product manager.
How do you actually make these transitions? And what were some of the things that you were thinking about every time you made those transitions?
Yeah, I can speak about each of those decision points in order. So when I first started at Microsoft, I had the amazing opportunity to work on the Xbox business, which is a really loved product that is shipped to millions of people around the world. I got to work on both hardware products and software products, which is an incredible opportunity, learning about the trade-offs of building something with plastics and silicon to shipping features that go globally. What are the restrictions in different countries, game availability, and so on. So after almost 3 years at Microsoft, I had an opportunity to work for one of my favorite games, League of Legends, which is now one of the most popular games in the world. And I had the opportunity to move from cloudy Seattle, a very rainy and dark place, to sunny Santa Monica, California. So that in itself was one decision, but I realized I wanted to build that muscle of how do you become someone that's a creative steward, someone that knows how to make videos, make animations, be able to work with all sorts of different creative talent, whether it's animators, whether it's 3D designers or animation studios. So I was really enthralled by that idea because very early on, I was very convinced that I wanted to be, at that intersection of creativity and technology. So I had a chance to take that plunge and move into the pure game industry, where I was for a little over 2 years, where I soon realized, hey, after learning how to build creative, I realized that it's almost like pursuing an art, that there are trade-offs when you only want to work in the creative industries, that it might not compensate you as well as the technology industry, or maybe that the opportunities overseas are not as big because the United States has probably one of the biggest creative fields, especially Los Angeles. And I always had my eyes set on moving overseas, especially Singapore. So I realized, hey, product marketing is such a really magical space that combines marketing, it combines business, it combines technology as a product manager. So I decided to move back to that space and to diversify my experience by working at a great company like LinkedIn, which is a huge company. And if you break it apart, there's so many different lines of business. There's the consumer product, which is the LinkedIn feed that you or I might use, where you message friends, build a profile, earn and endorse skills. It's a really diverse ecosystem. And then, of course, you have their B2B business, which has, companies posting jobs, companies paying for ads, and so forth. I was really excited to learn how to use data, how do you do experimentation, and ship non-gaming products to millions of users around the world. So that was an amazing opportunity to work at LinkedIn, which then after a while, I realized, hey, now I really want to make that trade-off to move overseas. It was a goal that I've had in my career for a very long time. And I decided that if I were to take that career risk of starting my own company, I wanted to do it earlier on in my career to get that first, shot on goal before I turned 30. So that was an amazing opportunity to come to Singapore through this program called Antler, which is an early stage venture capital fund where they bring very talented, diverse founders or entrepreneurs together and essentially matchmake them to find their co-founders and eventually to start their own companies. And that's where I had my first real opportunity to build a business from scratch, from the pitch decks, or even earlier than that, coming up with the idea, meeting my co-founder, and trying to build a business during COVID times. So after about a year of struggling and burning the midnight oil, eating a lot of instant ramen, I decided, hey, this venture wasn't likely to succeed, and I was ready to make that full-time commitment to pivot into product management.
Right now, what is the exact scope that you are covering in your current role?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the one and only product manager at One Esports, which is a early stage joint venture between One Championship and one of our parent companies. So in this very, very small company, I'm both essentially the janitor of product, where I have to do all of the nitty-gritty work, as well as the head of product, where I have to be responsible for the entire product roadmap, getting resources from our engineering team and fighting to prioritize different features across a variety of stakeholders. So what does that really boil down to? So I break it into three different pillars. One is our website, oneesports.gg. It is an esports and gaming website that is very popular here in Southeast Asia. It's a top 5 global esports website, which means there's millions and millions of viewers that come every single month. So I'm responsible for, one, the site stability and all the technical improvements, developing new features to, one, acquire more users and to get them to register for our website. And then, of course, as we think about the future, how do we build in personalization and other sorts of technology? So that's the first pillar, is oneesports.gg. And then 2 is a mobile app. So this year I had the opportunity to build a mobile app from 0 to 1, to work with our business development team, our partnerships team, to develop our first mobile app in conjunction with Samsung, one of the world's largest smartphones manufacturer. So I was responsible for both, again, scoping the app, delivering against it, and then working with our various stakeholders, both internal and external, to make sure that we have all of the marketing materials and all of the go-to-market strategy all aligned before our really big launch. So it's a variety of different hats that you wear just within that mobile app space. And of course, maintaining the feature roadmap and executing against it. And the last one I would call, this last pillar I would call frontier projects. In addition to these established or more mature product spaces, there's also more exciting spaces that we can venture into. We spent about 6 months, I can't say the exact budget number, but a significant amount of time and effort looking into the fantasy space, which is, it's similar to like fantasy basketball or fantasy baseball, where there's a meta game that goes beyond just watching the sport, but understanding, okay, what are the statistical likelihood of this team winning versus that team winning? How do you make guesses or predictions and in turn earn points or prizes? So we wanted to deepen the experience of an esports fan to engage more with the content beyond just watching the live stream.
How do you segment your time? I mean, these are huge projects in each of them themselves.
Yeah, so there's even just the time itself, but there's also emergent issues, right? You're also, as I mentioned, I'm the janitor of product as well, which means anytime there's an issue with the website, either the front end or back end, I'm the first line of defense and responsible for solving the problem. Right. So in the same way where you're both the security guard and you're the head of police.
So there's a little bit of like the ops perspective there as well. Okay.
But that's one of the challenges, but also the opportunities of working at an early stage startup in a product capacity. It's if it touches anything related to technology, you're responsible for it. And that's both exciting, but also makes it a challenge, right? How do you lay out your trade-offs, right? Where I try to segment my time based on what is both important and urgent. And it changes from week to week, depending on what the stakeholders are really focusing on as well.
I see. So you don't have like, for example, you know how big this project is going to be, what the priority that is already set by the company. Is there like no such priority?
So that's something that having worked at big companies myself, and whether it's at Microsoft, whether it's at LinkedIn, we have these year-long, 2-year-long product vision roadmaps. When you're at an early stage startup that's trying to find product market fit, that's a luxury we cannot afford. And this is, as a first-time product manager as well, I've had to learn that firsthand. I would love to have a beautifully groomed and prioritized backlog of features and be able to measure every single KPI. You get to do parts of that. At the same time, that's the one thing that you can predict that's always going to happen is change. So that's something that I've had to move away from and become much more comfortable with ambiguity and change.
What would you say is the most difficult part? Because everything is so ambiguous and you're like the solo person doing all of these 3 products. What is like your methodology in approaching that?
Yeah, so there's the challenge. What is the biggest challenge and then the methodology? So I'll break that down. I think methodology, I really break it down to that, is it urgent and is it important? Right? And of course you can use RICE, these different prioritization frameworks, whether it's like reach, impact, confidence, and level of effort required. And you can have your own prioritized roadmap and then constantly update your stakeholders of what is changing and why. But I guess the biggest challenge is actually we do not have very mature systems, right? Where if you're at a mature technology company, you have your experimentation platform, you have A/B testing, you have, an army of data scientists who cut all the data and create all the dashboards. No. Right. In this case, it all kind of falls on my plate, right? Where, if I want to do any sort of experimentation, I have to devise it, come up with the right platform to even set it up on. So that's probably the biggest challenge. It's the fact that you don't have a lot of the tools that you would at a large scale, mature tech company.
So you have to be really scrappy and you find your own resources to do that. And you probably would also need to pick up some skills along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's something that is one of the trade-offs that working at a early stage startup, you're constantly forced to retool your skill belt, reskill, upskill, gain new powers on your menu of abilities. And whether that's data, whether that's working with design, or simply fixing problems that were there from beforehand. Versus if you're at a mature technology company with a very, very, very established, you become very specialized, and your job is to fine tune, 0.2% lift. That's a green scorecard. Let's all celebrate, right? It's very much about like perpetual tuning versus big firefighting and trying to build new products, which I realize I'm much more gravitated towards the latter. I think that actually that's something that's almost ingrained from my time in marketing is you're constantly working on new campaigns for an existing product line Or I've been very fortunate to work on awesome products that are always new, whether it's a new Xbox console, whether it's a new League of Legends skin or a new event. You're constantly working on something new, which again has its pros and cons. You're constantly learning and, you're getting better at, that launch timeline. How do you get sharper and sharper? At the same time, you don't get that level of depth and investment into understanding this product ins and outs and all of the fine tuning. So there's no perfect job. Everything has trade-offs, but I think my time in marketing has almost got me addicted to constantly launching or building new exciting products.
I would say most product managers share that common trait of, always trying to find ways of improving a product. When I think about One Championship, there is something that's like very famous, and that is like the Netflix show,
yes,
like The Apprentice. I would say it's very much centered on your CEO, which is Chatri, right?
Yep.
And his personality there is someone who shows a lot of tough love to his employees. But at the same time, he also has a very alpha personality. So I was wondering if, this kind of strong leadership would trickle down into the product culture that you have in One Championship.
Yeah, I mean, I get that question a lot from, friends just here in Singapore and Southeast Asia, since, the Apprentice One Championship edition was such a popular show over the past year and a half. And it's almost funny I imagine it's similar to now people that work at Twitter. Everyone's always talking about Elon Musk. But fortunately, I think, I really admire and look up to Chatri. He's an amazing visionary, someone who has a rags to riches underdog story, going from, growing up without a father figure in his life to paying for his way through school, going to Harvard Business School, doing Wall Street, and again, pursuing his passion for martial arts and starting one of the world's largest sports media brands from scratch. So that whole journey, again, builds in this this culture of like, this is the hero, right? It's almost like that Steve Jobs sort of a cult of personality. And it's been interesting to see how that translates into company culture, where it is very top down. That's something that I realized too, that if, Chatri or if the board really wants something to happen, whether it's changing the prioritization from building incredible, back-end architecture to data collection, that's our priority no matter what. It forces that cruise ship to suddenly shift direction. All hands on deck, we're going to pivot.
Okay.
And how it translates to my world, since I work for the One esports CEO, his name is Carlos Alimarang, and he is also a really, really passionate and knowledgeable CEO who has a consulting background, went to MIT for his MBA, so it's just a total data junkie. It's really interesting because for myself, I wasn't used to such, working directly with the CEOs and understanding where they're coming from, right? That they have to handle the expectations from the board and shareholders and their own, peer group.
Right.
So I think there is quite a bit of a top-down culture, and you have to be able to respond to that. And that's very common in early-stage startups. It's if you're the product manager at an early-stage startup, you may think that you control the product vision, but that's very much not the case. It's the CEO or the founders that are very often still in charge of the product roadmap. You start to see a little bit of change when you start looking at Series B, C, and even publicly traded companies where there's multi-billion-dollar business lines, right? For example, every business division at Microsoft are billion-dollar companies, whether it's Xbox or Surface, the hardware business, or even Bing, the Google wannabe, right? They're all billion-dollar companies, and because they're so massive, as a product manager, you might be responsible for fine-tuning, the search algorithm for ads for the APAC region, right? Which the CEO of that business is so focused on other elements that might be higher priority that you will get to feel empowered to make those changes. Whereas in the smaller companies, the entire company is the product and vice versa. So the CEO or the founders of the company tend to be highly invested in even minute changes. So learning how to balance that dance, but also to come to the table ready with a strong point of view. And that's something that I've learned at this company. It's not just say, okay, got it, right? I'll just listen to what the CEO says. It's, hey, I looked at the data and this is what I learned, right? I think we should do this instead. So I think being able to speak up and articulate your view backed by data, backed by, a strongly worded and argued perspective. I think that's what makes a really effective product manager.
Yeah, I think that a lot of early stage startups, the success of that startup would very much lie on the shoulders of the leader, like the founder. We're also talking about how One Championship, because at its very core, is still a media business, right? Tech is just an enablement. It is just helping you to disseminate the media to wider audiences. So how would you grapple with that when you know that your role might not be, the core of this business?
Yeah, that's a really, really good concept. And I think it all stems from, why are you there? Right. And for myself, it's not, I want to be the CEO of the product and shift the direction of the company, which I think is sometimes what people expect when they enter a product management role, because it's often perceived as, you're the CEO of the product. When in reality, it's about skills acquisition. It's about understanding startups, that not all startups are technology startups, right? And then furthermore, I've just been humbled by the sheer fact that come from the Silicon Valley, I have this very, product is the way, that's the only way I've ever thought. But in reality, there's downsides to that level of thinking. It's almost a little bit too idealistic. And I think for me coming to this company, I've had to also conquer my own demons and realize you are part of the supporting cast, but the thinking that the CEOs will both share is tech is the future. In the same way where the NBA has become a global brand, not just because, we had Yao Ming or a few athletes from international, it's because the ways to consume the content have adopted to touch almost every single digital platform, right? Whether it's the different platforms in India or in China or in Europe. So there's an element of, the technology touch points. And I think they also realize that, okay, you might get eyeballs, but how do you get a share of wallet, right? So the different payment systems, trying to figure out what does loyalty mean? How do you build retention? Those are all things that the pure media, TV, broadcast world they know that the future of their industries are going to be, the new foundation will be in digital products. And that's why it's interesting that we get an opportunity to help shift that thinking.
I mean, you mentioned that there is always this competition for attention. But I would think that, what One Championship is really going into is something that's very much more niche, or it's quite at its infancy, because in Southeast Asia, when we talk about martial arts, it's still very Western centric. But then when One Championship came into the picture, it's like, a breath of fresh air. So what would you say are like the core challenges that you think would make or break this business?
Sure. You can have share of eyeballs, but then how do you break and get share of wallet, right? More so, a lot of our viewers are based in Southeast Asia, which is not as high GDP markets compared to the Western audiences, right? Whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the UK. But I think one of the biggest differentiators for One Championship versus UFC, which is our biggest competitor in the West, it's our entire brand and our ethos, where UFC is basically blood sport, right? It's people, all the fighters are, tattooed there. They say horrible things about their competitors. They throw chairs at buses. And I like to watch UFC as well, which is why I'm so informed about this and how I even discovered, One FC while still living in the States. It's One Championship is based on martial arts, right? Which is core to the Asian culture, right? Whether it's Muay Thai, whether it's Kung Fu, it's karate. There's so many cultural ties. And what are those ties? Honor, integrity, discipline, respect, right? Where the fighters always hug, and they always, even if you were literally moments ago beating each other up, they end up hugging it out and respecting each other, even bowing to one another, like, thank you so much for an amazing fight. Right. So I think that's almost one big brand differentiation. And if I were to pivot from One Championship purely from like a martial arts side to One esports, that's also a very challenging business because yes, let's say gaming is here to stay. We've seen over COVID that gaming went from something that you kind of make fun of and like, those are the nerds playing games, to everyone and their parents are playing games now, right? And that is not going to change. And then two, you realize that, okay, in addition to people playing games, people are now watching people play games. There's esports, which is professional gaming in a competitive lens, right? So people are consuming that content. But then the third challenge here that I want to bring up, it's the vast majority of revenue and vast majority of the power is controlled by game developers and game publishers, right? They control the intellectual property. And I myself have worked at those game publisher platforms and companies. Riot Games is one of the most profitable game companies ever. Microsoft, they own, Activision Blizzard, pending, I guess oversight from a monopolistic perspective. They have all the power, which means they have all the money. But the exciting part about One Esports is they have the hearts and the minds of one of the most exciting and fastest growing user bases here in Southeast Asia, where there is room. Even though we don't own Mobile Legends, the game, we have amazing partnerships with these different developers and publishers. And that's what we're trying to figure out. It's how do we figure out more ways to monetize? How do we figure out ways to deepen fan engagement? Where are we uniquely positioned where we can combine fandoms across different games, right? Whereas, Riot Games really can't do anything with Mobile Legends. They're completely different companies. But how can we be that in between? And I think the closest analogy would be, how do we not just be the ESPN, right? Which is it's probably the biggest international sports news syndicate, to something deeper, right? Where people truly love, these stories about esports heroes. How do we not just talk about, this game, or, how do we basically create World Cup moments? Yes, World Cup moments in community, right? Where it's not just what we have, countries rooting for each other, as well as you celebrate the individual players and their sacrifices. And that's something that we're trying to do as well. And I find that very inspiring.
So thanks so much, Derek, for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.